Synopsis of the books of the Bible. 1 Samuel. By JND Darby. All scripture is given by inspiration of God, and is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness, that the man of God may be perfect, thoroughly furnished unto all good works. 2 Timothy 3 verses 16 and 17. Synopsis of the books of the Bible. By John Nelson Darby. 1 Samuel, chapter 20. David a wanderer in the earth. David is now driven away from the presence of Saul and becomes a wanderer in the earth. It is no longer entire submission to Saul, whilst himself the vessel of the energy of God. Driven away by Saul, David had returned to the source of God's testimony, and Saul had again dared to seek his life, even when he was with Samuel. He has completely thrown off the last restraint, and forgotten all that should have reminded him of God, and stayed his hand. Seeking his own glory, and taking advantage of his acquired position, the presence of Samuel has no longer any hold upon his conscience. It is even no longer honor me before the elders of my people. He does not value the prophet at all. He comes, in spite of himself, under an influence which he has despised. David is thus shielded from his malice. He could not now return to Saul. It would have been to unite himself with the despisal of God's testimony. For, what can be done when a man prophesies, and yet runs counter to the power which he cannot deny? David takes flight. But Saul's state is again tested by this state of things. Jonathan can scarcely credit his father's ill will. But, before putting it to the proof, his devotion to David is very plainly manifested. His faith and his heart acknowledge that which the blinded Saul cannot receive. 1 Samuel 20 verses 13 to 17. Jonathan's love for David. Even when David is driven away, Jonathan's faith is not shaken. His heart is not separated from the one whom his soul loved. When, radiant with youth and the glory of his victory over Goliath, David replied to Saul with a modesty that heightened its luster. He loves him when dishonored and a fugitive. He acknowledges him as God's elect, and links the hopes of his house with the glory of his beloved. See note. Note. See 1 Samuel 23 verses 16 and 17. But what Jonathan proposed that could not be, that is, connection between the old system in the flesh and God's grace and purpose. Jonathan, though loving David, walked with the old, which God was going to judge. End of note. But Jonathan does not follow David, and he falls with Saul. Whatever opinion we may entertain with respect to the typical meaning of this part of his history, we see in him that whatever is allied to the carnal system, which is outwardly connected with the interests of the people and name of God, falls, as regards this world, with the system that perishes entirely. David, informed by Jonathan of Saul's state of mind, departs, and Jonathan returns into the city.